TV host and personality, reality television star, the first woman in WWE history to be a full-time commentator on WWE Monday Night Raw, Slammy Award winner, overall good time. I'm so excited, guys. We had a Fans' Choice Month last week, and now it's time to get back into some things that are just purely for the fan in me, and hopefully for the fan in everybody else. Ladies, gentlemen, my non-binary friends, it is Josh Robinson here for Love Wrestling, and today we're diving into the legacy of Renee Paquette. Our Canadian fans here on Love Wrestling would first know Renee Paquette began working for The Score in 2009 on a program called Right After Wrestling, which was later renamed Aftermath. She presented alongside people like Mauro Ranallo, who you probably know from his time in NXT and sports broadcasting and commentating. She would officially sign with WWE in October of 2012 and was given the initial name of Renee Sterling before choosing the name Renee Young. Her first official appearance was a co-host for the 2012 SummerSlam pre-show alongside Scott Stanford. She would make her NXT debut as a backstage interviewer in January of 2013. Now, in the early part of her career, Renee would wear so many different hats. Backstage interviewer, a brief run on commentary in NXT in 2013. She would appear on multiple different YouTube series and stuff that was filmed for the worldwide and international audience of WWE, such as Vintage Collection alongside the amazing Gene Okerlund. She would do so many different things that she was just trying to find her place on WWE television, especially in a role that's fairly formatted. It's fairly to the book. You're a backstage interviewer, you're a host of some kind. There's kind of a certain way that the WWE would approach these things. And I think Renee's biggest thing that I've just fell in love with as a fan of professional wrestling and as a fan of Renee's is that she was able to put Renee into these kind of things. Yes, okay, you do have a pretty set formula with how WWE backstage interviews go, but there's always something about the way Renee kind of did certain interviews and did things, and she would put her own Renee spin on things. It's what originally attracted to me as her as a performer is the fact that she was able to put these kind of own subtleties and just the way she reacted to things. It wasn't just like, it can get pretty robotic with a lot of different people they've had in that role over the years of just, here's my question, here's the answer. Here's my question, here's the answer. Renee was actually reacting to what they were saying and not just being like, okay, I've got to ask the next question. She was able to kind of weave her way into these interviews and make them, while keeping the focus on the talent, because that's any great interviewer keeps the focus on the talent, but also still presenting herself in a way that's not just the cliche, not just the robotic kind of way that an interview can go in any field. It doesn't just have to be in WWE, but in any field. Renee was able to make it her own. Now, I mentioned that Renee did some commentary work on NXT. She was doing color commentary during a lot of the women's matches, became a full-time color commentator on NXT for a few months. She would actually also, a lot of people don't realize this before she went on to Monday Night Raw, which we'll cover in a second, she was actually a color commentator over on Superstars along with Tom Phillips, which would make her the first full-time announcer in more than a decade. The first full-time female announcer on any WWE program in over a decade. I said it again to get it into your brain. Renee was already breaking barriers and making history in the very early part of her career. Renee would start hosting her own network show, Unfiltered with Renee Young. She kind of interviewed different kind of WWE superstars and employees, and just kind of, it was like an extension of the network. And what I originally thought the network was going to be was to have wrestling, but also have the life outside of the professional wrestler, and Renee was the perfect person for that job. Now, I mentioned that Renee did so many different things in the first few years of her career. In 2015, she would serve as the co-host of the 6th season of Tough Enough alongside Chris Jericho. Hosting is her natural comfort. You can see it. It's where she feels the most at home. It's where Renee shines the best, is when she's hosting. Tough Enough was the first kind of experience we got to see on like a television competition series, whatever you want to call Tough Enough, of her live hosting experience and the way that she can fit into that role, and why she started to do more kickoff panels and started to do different things, like I said, with Unfiltered. That's where Renee was shining the most. Yes, she was a great backstage interviewer, always will be, and always will have a spot in those roles wherever she decides to go in the world of professional wrestling. But she was the best when she was doing this kind of stuff, when she could steer the conversation, when she could steer the rest of the panel in the case of a kickoff show, or kind of steer the way the show needed to be told and what needed to be done. Renee was working the best when she was in those situations. In 2016, Renee would be introduced into WWE storylines alongside Dean Ambrose, of course, now known as Jon Moxley. It was interesting. It was something that I didn't think would ever happen with Renee, but she was in this storyline with Dean and The Miz and Maurice. She even got to slap The Miz. The slap heard around the world on an episode of SmackDown Live. Maurice would get her back in a backstage segment a couple of weeks later. It was pretty cool, I guess, in a sense, to see an announcer, a backstage interviewer, in a storyline and kind of playing on the real life thing. I don't know if it did what it was intended to do, but hey, I'm still talking about it 6 years, 7 years later, however long it's been, so I guess it kind of did serve its purpose. It didn't really last long of her being in this kind of storyline. They always kind of alluded to the fact that she was with Dean. We'll get to that in commentary in a minute, but it was, I guess, in a word, to sum up her brief little time in the storyline with The Miz and Maurice and Dean, was interesting, and it certainly showed, if anything, that Renee can do multiple different things. Wearing multiple hats is something I keep alluding to in this, is because Renee did that. Renee wore so many different hats in the time that she was in WWE for over 8 years. On the August 13th, 2018 episode of Raw, Renee Young filled in for Jonathan Coachman as a guest commentator, making her the first ever woman to call an entire episode of Raw in its over 1,000 episode history. That is insane. Renee Young would make more history when she joined the Raw commentary team full-time the following month to become the first permanent female commentator in the program's history. How incredible. Now, Renee Paquette, Renee Young, whatever you want to call her, was a full-time WWE commentator for about a year on Monday Night Raw. She has said so herself. A lot of people got on her in that time, whether it be fans on the internet or whatever. Her own worst critic, I'm sure, like all of us, is herself. She was thrusted into a job that she did not have a lot of experience in, and I personally have always said this, I'm not just saying this for this episode of The Legacy of Renee. I won't sit here and blow smoke up Renee's ass just because I like Renee. She did well in that role. I don't think that she was the best commentator ever, but I certainly do not think that she was the worst. And she got to do a lot of things as a woman in that spot. We haven't had a woman step into that role in a full-time capacity on Monday Night Raw or even SmackDown since Renee left in 2019. We have Beth Phoenix over on NXT, and we have some other women coming into the forefront of commentating in other promotions, but Renee did it first, and that 365 days, give or take, was an interesting time for Renee, and I think a lot of what Renee is best in, like I said, is the hosting, is the steering the conversation. When you're in a 3-person booth, you can't necessarily do that, especially when you're kind of you're not the play-by-play, you're not the color, you're like the color to the color, and it's very awkward. 3 people kind of booths are not everyone's cup of tea, and I'm sure they're very, very hard. I don't know personally because I've never done it, but I couldn't imagine it would be the easiest thing in the world to do. But Renee got to do a lot of things. She got to call Undertaker matches, which is absolutely insane. She got to be one of the very first women, actually the very first woman, to appear in Saudi Arabia for WWE. That is a big deal. People will have their kind of thoughts on WWE going to Saudi Arabia, and that's fine. But Renee was able to be a woman in a country that isn't necessarily the same as the Western world is with women. That's a big deal, what Renee was able to do in her time on commentary. She was able to call the first ever women's main event at WrestleMania. She was able to go to places, like I mentioned, Saudi Arabia, come over to Australia and do an 80,000 seat stadium commentary show. She was able to do that in her commentary time in that year that she was a full-time, currently the only female to call an entire episode, multiple entire episodes of Monday Night Raw. Renee would leave the spot in October of 2019. She would move over to SmackDown before co-hosting the new studio program known as WWE Backstage. Ultimately, what I believe is WWE Backstage was a victim of coronavirus, was a victim of COVID-19 in the entertainment world, and it kind of killed the show before it could even really get started. We had a few little specials that Renee was able to do, but it really suffered from the pandemic, and that's a damn shame because I really liked WWE Backstage, and Renee was in her element, hosting a show with talking about wrestling, but with different kind of superstars popping in and talking about different topics, and kind of not being in the WWE system of like, we want you to say this. By the way, Renee was still able to do a fantastic job in that role, but just kind of letting herself kind of be in charge and guiding the conversation with her panel. I just thought she did a great job. After weeks and weeks of speculation, it was at SummerSlam in August of 2020 that Renee Young would state that the event would be her last appearance with the company. She was able to do the 2-hour kickoff panel for WWE one last time, and there was a lot of things that she has stated that was kind of summing up her time with WWE and kind of bringing it to an end. She explained that the cancellation of WWE Backstage, and she kind of just felt like she had accomplished everything that she could in her role at WWE in the 8 years that she was there. And I couldn't agree more. Renee did absolutely everything that she could, and Renee did a damn fantastic job at everything that she did in WWE. In her time in WWE, not only did she do all of these things, but she was also a reality television star for one season of Total Divas and a few little recurring appearances here and there on Total Divas and Total Bellas, and even Ms. and Mrs. Renee was featured as a regular cast member for season number 6. That's a pretty cool deal and a pretty cool thing to do, and she said on multiple times that really wasn't her thing, it really wasn't John's thing, but she did it, and it was still cool to see her. It was cool to see a different woman on Total Divas. If you're a fan of Total Divas and you're a fan of all that kind of stuff and reality television, it was all focused on wrestlers, and she was not a wrestler. She was a backstage correspondent or a host, whatever you want to call Renee. It was cool to see another woman doing other things in WWE featured on that show. Post WWE time, Renee has created her own podcast, #Oral Sessions, everyone. I'll put it in the description, Give a little love to Oral Sessions. I absolutely love Oral Sessions. It is exactly what Renee, again, is best at, is being freeform and being casual, but in such a professional way, and just having a chit-chat with her friends in the professional wrestling and sometimes in professional wrestling world. Renee does a great job, and it's just something that she can sink her teeth into since having a kid, little baby Nora, and I said at the start of this, just being an overall great time. If you know me and you follow me on Twitter, you know how much admiration I have for Renee and how much I just appreciate Renee for what she did. One of my favorite things that have come out of wrestling is Renee. I absolutely adore her, and I just think that she's great, and she's such a role model to me. I look up to Renee in so many ways of like, I want to be that one day, and I model a lot of things that I do in the mindset of like, this is what Renee would do, and this is how Renee would tackle something. Truly a big fan of Renee, and if she ever hears this, or anyone that's listening to this, I hope people know that this series is spawned from a different so many different things and so many different avenues, and I take things from so many people, and Renee is at the very top of that list of things that I just kind of take inspiration from. And I think Oral Sessions is a great kind of reminder of just how damn fun she is and how good she is at hosting her own television show. But as you can tell, I'm a huge fan of Renee Paquette and just love her work and continued success for wherever she goes, whether it's inside the wrestling world or not. You know, there's a non-compete that's kind of come to an end, as she stated in a few interviews. So I hope to see Renee pop up on some professional wrestling programs very, very soon. Maybe she'll light the boom very, very, very soon. Who knows? But I'm going to say goodbye for this week here on the very first of this huge September we've got coming up. We have Charlotte Flair next week here on The Legacy Of. The week after, we're going to have Edge on The Legacy Of. Yes, I'm branching out. We're going to be starting to look at some other careers of not just females within the industry, but some other things. But to wrap up the month here in September, it is going to be looking at the legacy of WWE Evolution in 2018 in the light of everything that's just happened with NWA in Power. I think it's cool to go back and have a look at Evolution. But on October 8th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, it is the biggest Legacy Of in the history of this series. We are looking at the Legacy of ECW. We're going to be going through the entire, when I say entire, I mean everything, with ECW. This is going to be huge, and I mean that literally, I mean that figuratively. It is going to be a massive Legacy Of, the most polished, in-depth, crazy adventure, crazy mission that I'm taking on with this series. So join me on October 8th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Put it into the Google machines and you can find your time zone. 6 p.m. Eastern Time, October 8th, right here on Love Wrestling is when it will be dropped. It is going to be insane. Things are getting extreme around here. But, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at JoshRobinson_00. Follow Love Wrestling on Twitter at LoveWrestlingCA. All of the links in the description box. I'll put them in there. That was English. We got there in the end. Whatever. It's all good. It's all good. Of course, let YouTube know that we're doing a good job by leaving a like on this video. And if you haven't, go over and hit the big red subscribe button and click the bell so you're getting notifications of when Love Wrestling are dropping new videos. We are rapidly growing here on Love Wrestling, and I'm so honored that my voice gets to be a part of this huge experience and this huge journey that we're undertaking here at Love Wrestling. But let me know what you think about Renee Paquette in the comments below. Give this all the love on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. And next Monday, we'll see you for Miss Charlotte Flair, which is going to be a lot of fun. Can already tell that one's going to be a lot of fun to do. But I'm signing off here, friends. I love you all very much. Peace out.